Welcome to the deep dive.
Whoa.
Ever stop to think that the super smart AI we hear so much about has a surprisingly basic flaw?
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it?
It really is. It often operates in its own little world, sort of
Yeah.
oblivious to its mistakes.
And stubbornly resistant to correction, too.
Exactly. We're not
Yeah.
talking about minor hiccups here.
No, not at all. Today, we're diving deep into error-blind AI versus controlled AI from Crew Research.
Right, that source. Heard good things.
Yeah, it explores the fundamental reasons why AI struggles with this. So our mission today is really to understand this error blindness and solution deafness.
Okay. And unpack this proposed need for a meta AI.
Exactly, to, keep things on track.
It almost feels like a paradox. We see these incredible AI advancements, leaps and bounds, yet this research suggests some really, hardwired limitations.
It does. It really does.
Makes you wonder about all those AI interactions you have daily, the search results, the recommendations.
All of it.
Could they be confidently wrong without even knowing it? Okay, let's get to the heart of this. Where does this fundamental problem actually begin?
Well, the source points directly to how current AI learns. It essentially pieces together its understanding by spotting patterns.
Okay, pattern recognition. Makes sense.
But crucially, it does this within the confines of a, limited data set it was trained on.
Right. It's trained on what it's shown. So the problem is,
Here's the rub. The real world is this chaotic, infinitely complex place.
always changing.
Always. While the AI's understanding is built on those finite, learned patterns from its training.
No matter how much data you feed it.
Right, no matter how vast the training data, it can never truly capture every nuance of reality.
So that gap, the AI's limited experience kind of bumping up against the real world's endless variety,
Yeah.
that's where errors start creeping in.
Precisely. The research argues that errors aren't just random glitches. They're a potential, maybe even an unavoidable consequence of this basic mismatch.
Okay, a consequence of the design itself.
And here's the really unsettling part. AI often lacks the internal wiring to even realize when these errors occur.
So it can be totally off base, yet completely unaware, just marching forward with its limited understanding.
Exactly, applying its rules even in situations where they just don't fit.
Which leads us to what the source calls error spots, right? Specific ways this blindness shows up.
Yes, the source highlights two key areas where these error spots manifest. The first is what they term generalization mismatch.
Generalization mismatch. Okay, what's the core idea there?
Think of it as AI learning a rule that's super specific to its training data, a local rule that breaks the moment it steps outside its tiny training neighborhood.
So it learns a pattern, but that pattern doesn't hold true everywhere.
Exactly. It's a generalization that's too specific to its limited experience.
The source uses a great illustration with Arctic foxes, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. Imagine an AI that's been shown nothing but white Arctic foxes.
Okay, so it learns Arctic fox white.
Its internal rule becomes something like that. Arctic foxes are white. Now, what happens when it encounters a gray Arctic fox? Maybe one that's, molting.
It wouldn't register it as an Arctic fox, even though it is.
Correct.
Its ingrained white fur rule doesn't match the gray reality.
Exactly. The generalization it made was too narrow, too tied to the specifics of its training data, and it fails when faced with natural variations.
Have you ever seen an AI stumble like that
Yeah.
in a seemingly obvious way?
Oh, absolutely. It happens because its understanding was just too limited, too constrained by what it saw before.
It's like those early image recognition systems getting confused by a slightly different camera angle or lighting.
Same principle, yeah. So that's generalization mismatch. What's the second type of error spot?
Okay, what's next?
The second is pattern mismatch. This is a bit different. It happens because AI heavily leans on the fixed patterns it's learned from past data.
Right, it relies on what it already knows.
But the real world, as we know, is always evolving, constantly throwing new and unexpected things our way.
So the AI tries to jam these new, unfamiliar inputs into its existing rigid categories.
Pretty much. If it doesn't have a pre-existing pattern for something new, it tries to force it into an old one it does have.
Like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Exactly like that. The source gives the example of an AI trained solely on identifying dogs and apples.
Okay, very specific training.
So it develops distinct patterns for dogness and appleness. Now, if you show that AI a picture of a fox, something completely outside its training,
It wouldn't have a foxness pattern in its memory bank. So what happens?
It tries to classify the fox based on whatever surface-level features seem closest to its existing pattern.
So it looks for similarities.
Exactly. The source suggests it might mistakenly label the fox as a dog.
Because maybe it sees four legs and fur, similar to the dogs it was trained on.
Precisely. It's those fixed, pre-learned patterns proving inadequate for genuinely novel situations. A fox trying to squeeze into a dog-shaped hole, so to speak.
Okay, so these fundamental traps, generalization mismatch where the learned rules are too restrictive, and pattern mismatch where old patterns struggle with new realities.
Right.
These bring us to the central issue, error blindness. How does the source actually define that?
Error blind, according to the source, simply means that the AI doesn't detect or recognize its own errors as they happen. It's blind to them.
And the core reasons behind that, why doesn't it have that internal alarm bell going off saying, whoops, maybe that's wrong?
The source outlines several key factors. First, it's rooted in its statistical learning approach.
Okay.
AI operates by finding probabilistic links in its training data. It finds what's likely based on the past.
It doesn't have an inherent understanding of truth or factual correctness in the way humans do.
Exactly. It's about finding the most statistically likely match based on past data, not necessarily grasping underlying reality or, truth.
So it's all about likelihood, not a true understanding of being right or wrong.
That's a good way to put it. Second, AI lacks metacognition.
Metacognition, thinking about thinking.
Yeah, the ability to reflect on its own thought processes. It doesn't have internal benchmarks or self-monitoring system to evaluate its output as potentially incorrect.
It can't step back and analyze its own judgments.
No. And the third piece of this puzzle,
What else?
it lacks the capacity for that kind of self-referential evaluation. It can't objectively assess its own conclusions from a broader perspective.
Hmm.
And the really profound takeaway here is that because of this fundamental architecture, the AI doesn't actually experience errors internally.
Doesn't feel wrong.
Not at all. And if it doesn't experience them, it can't meaningfully communicate about them either.
That's a bit unsettling. It can make a mistake, maybe with significant real-world consequences.
Absolutely.
But internally, it's just business as usual, processing complete. And it can't even flag that error to us.
Nope.
That's a huge difference in how humans deal with mistakes.
Yeah.
We usually know when we've messed up or at least suspect it.
Right. And then there's this related idea the source brings up, solution deafness. What's the essence of that?
Solution deafness. Okay.
It means that even if we, as external observers, spot an error and offer a correction, like point it out directly,
Yeah.
the AI structurally struggles to effectively accept or integrate that feedback to adjust its understanding or behavior.
So even if you point out, hey, that's not right, it doesn't really process that in a way that leads to genuine learning. Like, it doesn't stick.
That's the core argument. The source explains that once trained and deployed, current AI systems typically rely on fixed algorithms. They aren't really designed for on-the-fly adjustments to their core logic based on a single piece of external input.
So it's not like a person who hears something new and can quickly update their knowledge.
Not really, no. It's much more rigid.
So one correction is just a tiny drop in the ocean compared to the vast amount of data it was initially trained on.
Yeah.
That one contradictory signal gets drowned out.
Precisely. The sheer weight of its entire training history tends to overshadow a single correction. And crucially, the source emphasizes the absence of a robust feedback loop, a built-in mechanism specifically designed to take in external corrections and fundamentally alter its core understanding or behavior in real time.
So circling back to the gray fox example,
Yeah.
even if you show the AI a gray fox and say, look, this is also an Arctic fox, it might not effectively incorporate that information for future identification.
Exactly. It might temporarily override for that one instance, maybe, depending on the system, but the underlying white fox rule might remain largely untouched.
So it doesn't fundamentally change its understanding.
The source concludes that even when we explicitly tell the AI it's wrong, it doesn't truly register that as wrong in a way that triggers a structural change or real learning. It's deaf to the solution we offer.
Okay, so we're looking at an AI that's prone to making errors, doesn't realize it's making them, and can't really learn when we try to correct it. Wow. That sounds like a pretty major issue if we're increasingly relying on these systems for important stuff.
It really is. But the research does propose a potential path forward, this concept of meta AI. What exactly is that?
Meta AI. Okay, what's the idea?
Meta AI, as the source presents it, is essentially a higher level intelligence designed to oversee, manage, and compensate for the limitations of these error-blind, solution-deaf AIs.
Like a supervisor.
Exactly. Think of it as a supervisor, an external layer of oversight that the primary AI lacks internally.
So what would this meta AI actually do in practice? What are its key functions according to the source?
Well, the source outlines several critical roles. First, error detection.
Okay.
The meta AI would actively monitor the output of the lower level AI in real time, specifically looking for those generalization and pattern mismatches that the primary AI is blind to.
So it's actively hunting for those known blind spots, the potential failure points.
Exactly. Second, risk assessment.
Risk assessment.
If an error is detected, the meta AI would evaluate the potential real-world consequences, the social, physical, financial impact, depending on where the AI is being used.
Right, because a mistake in recommending a movie is very different from a mistake in, say, diagnosing a medical condition or controlling a vehicle.
Precisely. Very different stakes. Third, intervention decision.
Makes sense.
Based on the type of error and the assessed risk, the meta AI would decide if and when to step in.
Okay, so what does stepping in mean?
This could involve halting the lower AI's operation entirely, maybe modifying its output or prompting it to reevaluate with different parameters, perhaps.
It has the authority to essentially say, hold on, something's not right here, stop or change.
Yes. And
Yeah.
fourth, learning adjustment.
Ah, learning. But we just said the lower AI is solution deaf.
Right, good point. So this isn't necessarily about directly retraining the lower level AI in real time for all the reasons we've discussed.
Okay.
Instead, it's more about the meta AI analyzing the patterns of the errors it detects. This enhances the meta AI's own ability to spot future errors.
So the supervisor gets smarter.
Exactly. Or it provides valuable data that could inform more fundamental updates or retraining of the subordinate AI, but offline at a later stage, not instant learning.
This whole idea sounds a lot like how we humans reflect on our mistakes and try to learn from them, that
Yeah.
self-correction loop.
The source makes that exact comparison. Humans possess this metacognitive ability for self-correction, or at least the potential for it.
Yeah, potential being the key word sometimes.
True. But the AI, as currently designed and described in the source, fundamentally lacks it. So this meta AI is an attempt to build that crucial oversight and correction mechanism externally because it's missing internally.
Okay, that makes sense. And the research really stresses the importance of this meta AI, doesn't it? It's framed not just as a nice to have, but almost a necessity.
Absolutely. It's not just about tweaking AI to be a little better. It's presented as being about ensuring fundamental safety and reliability.
Which is critical.
And that's where the source brings in that thought-provoking quote from Wittgenstein.
Oh, right. The what we cannot speak about.
Quote, "We must pass over in silence." Yeah.
Interesting. How does that relate specifically to AI that's blind to its own errors? What's the connection the source makes?
Well, the source offers a really insightful interpretation. The AI makes errors it can't speak about internally. It's unaware of them. It has no concept of them.
Okay.
But here's the crucial point the source makes. When an external entity, a human user, or this proposed meta AI identifies the error and points it out, the AI doesn't then simply pass over it in silence.
It doesn't stop.
No, it doesn't stop. It doesn't acknowledge the mistake. It doesn't self-correct. It just keeps operating incorrectly, still blind to the problem. It doesn't go silent when it should.
I see the connection now. Because the AI won't correct itself or even stop when it's demonstrably wrong, we need this higher intelligence, the meta AI, to step in and enforce that silence,
Exactly.
to make it stop or change course when an error is detected because it won't do it itself.
Precisely. The fundamental purpose of meta AI, according to the source, is twofold. First, to detect the errors the primary AI is blind to, and second, to make the AI stop or adjust its behavior based on that detection.
It's about imposing control from the outside.
Because the AI lacks the inherent capacity for self-control regarding its own errors.
Okay, so let's try to boil down the key takeaways from this deep dive into error-blind AI versus controlled AI. What are the absolute must-remember points?
I'd say the core insights are: first, current AI systems have built-in structural limitations, these generalization and pattern mismatches that naturally lead to errors. It's not just bad luck.
It's inherent in the design.
Okay. Second, these AIs are fundamentally error blind. They don't recognize their own mistakes. They lack that self-awareness component.
Got it, blind.
Third, they are solution deaf. They really struggle to learn from or incorporate external corrections in a meaningful structural way.
Deaf to feedback. And crucially,
these aren't minor glitches we can just easily patch. The source argues they represent deep architectural issues.
Which leads directly to the central argument for meta AI.
Exactly. The source strongly contends that this inherent blindness and inability to learn from being corrected are so fundamental, so structural, that they necessitate a higher control mechanism, this meta AI concept.
It's needed to actively manage and guide the inherently flawed primary AI.
If we want reliable and, maybe more importantly, safe outcomes, especially in high-stakes situations.
Because in critical applications, healthcare, finance, autonomous systems, we simply can't afford AI that doesn't know when it's wrong and can't learn from those errors. The risks are just too high.
Precisely. Reliability and safety demand this external oversight, according to this view.
So thinking about you, the listener, who likely interacts with AI systems every single day, whether it's obvious like a chatbot or less obvious like your search results, social media feeds, product recommendations.
Even creative tools, navigation apps, it's everywhere now.
Right. Why is it so important for you to grasp this fundamental idea that the AI powering these things might be fundamentally blind to its own mistakes and unable to simply learn when someone points out an error? What's the takeaway for everyday users?
I think it fundamentally shifts how we should understand AI, or at least how this source suggests we should. Instead of seeing it as this ever-improving, almost human-like intelligence that constantly gets better on its own.
Which is often the hype.
It often is, yeah. But perhaps we should view it more as an incredibly powerful but also fundamentally limited tool. A tool that, especially when deployed for significant tasks, requires very careful oversight, validation, and potentially, as this research argues, active control systems like Meta AI to mitigate its inherent blind spots.
So less magic, more machine needing careful handling.
Kind of, yeah. Understanding the limitations is key to using it wisely and safely.
This deep dive into error-blind AI versus controlled AI really shines a light on a critical challenge, doesn't it, in the way we're currently developing and deploying AI.
It definitely does.
The source makes a very compelling case that these systems we're building are structurally blind to their own failures and deaf to our attempts to correct them directly.
Yeah, that core argument is powerful.
Which really underscores this urgent need for something like the Meta AI layer they propose, or at least some form of robust oversight.
It definitely leaves us with a crucial question to consider, doesn't it?
What's that?
Given this analysis that current AI is fundamentally blind to its errors and can't truly learn from being corrected, what are the potential risks? The dangers we might face as we increasingly integrate these powerful AI systems into really critical aspects of our lives?
I mean, things like healthcare, transportation, finance, security.
Exactly. What happens if we continue down this path without implementing the kind of robust external meta layer of control and validation that this research argues is so essential?
Yeah, that's a really important question to keep in mind.
It really is, especially as these technologies become even more deeply woven into the fabric of our world. Something to think about.